Getting a spot at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor was the realization of a dream for me. At 19, I finally moved to this vibrant university town, full of expectations and enthusiasm. The idea of studying psychology, a field that has always fascinated me with the complexity of the human mind, made me excited. I knew this new phase would be the perfect opportunity to learn, grow, and maybe discover something new about myself. When I arrived in Ann Arbor, I was immediately captivated by the welcoming atmosphere and the contagious energy of the city. The urban landscape, full of trees, parks, and historic buildings, made me feel like I was in a magical place. My parents were right in saying this would be one of the best experiences of my life. With each box unpacked, I felt that a new chapter was beginning, full of promises and possibilities. My new home was everything I could have wished for. It was a charming building, with a red brick facade covered in ivy and a well-kept garden in front. The interior had a vintage feel, with wooden floors and antique furniture, but it was well preserved and extremely cozy. The neighborhood couldn't have been more pleasant. Tree-lined streets, picturesque houses, and friendly neighbors who always offered a smile or a wave. On my first day in the new house, I was surprised by an unexpected visit. Mrs. Martinez, my elderly neighbor from the house next door, showed up at my door with a welcome cake. She looked over 60 years old, with kind eyes and a warm smile that lit up her face. She lived alone and made a point of introducing herself, offering help if I needed anything. "Welcome to the neighborhood, dear," she said, extending the cake to me with a warm gesture. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to knock on my door." I thanked her warmly, feeling lucky to have such a generous and helpful neighbor. Mrs. Martinez seemed like the type of person everyone would like to have around, always ready to help and spread kindness. As we said goodbye, I felt a sense of comfort, believing that this new phase of my life would be truly special. The following days were a mix of organization and exploration. My routine was simple, but full of small tasks that kept me busy. Unpacking the boxes seemed like an endless process, each one revealing items that brought back memories of my old home. I hung pictures on the walls, organized the books on the shelf, and arranged the furniture as best as possible. Everything needed to find its place, and I wanted my new home to be a reflection of myself. Knowing that my classes at the University of Michigan wouldn't start for another month, I had plenty of time to adapt to the new city. In the mornings, I walked around the neighborhood, getting familiar with local shops and neighbors. In the afternoon, I dedicated myself to organizing the house. It was on one of those afternoons, while adjusting the living room curtains, that I heard the doorbell ring again. When I opened the door, I found my elderly neighbor once more, this time holding a small box. "Hello, Anna. I hope you're enjoying the neighborhood. I brought a gift for you," she said, with that warm smile that was already starting to feel familiar. "It's a clock, so you never lose track of time during your studies at the university." I felt a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Oh, Mrs. Martinez, you didn't have to. You've already been so generous with me." "I insist, dear. It's something I would really like you to have." I opened the box carefully and was amazed at what I saw. The clock was all silver, adorned with intricate details that seemed to have been handmade. It looked expensive and very old, carrying an aura of mystery and elegance. Even with my initial reluctance, I couldn't help but be charmed by the gift. "It's beautiful, but I really can't accept something so valuable," I protested. although my voice already showed signs of surrender. Please accept it. It will be useful for you, especially with your busy life. I gave in to her request and thanked her sincerely. As I looked more closely at the clock, I noticed something peculiar on the back. There were strange inscriptions in a language I couldn't recognize. Those inscriptions intrigued me, but I decided not to think too much about it at that moment. Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. Really, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Anna. Just enjoy it, and if you need anything, I'll be here. With a final smile, she said goodbye and returned to her house. I closed the door, holding the clock carefully. I decided to put it on my wrist, feeling amazed by the gift. In the following days, as I finished organizing the house, I began to notice something strange. At night, a growing feeling of discomfort and the impression of being watched took over me. Initially, I attributed this to the stress of moving and accumulated fatigue. In the first few nights, I went to bed early, exhausted from the day's activities. However, I would wake up in the middle of the night with the clear perception that someone was watching me. The room, enveloped in darkness and silence, seemed oppressive, and the discomfort was palpable. This persistent feeling wouldn't leave me alone. I began to hear small, inexplicable noises, light footsteps in the hallway, doors that creaked slightly. Each sound intensified my anxiety, leaving me certain that something was not right. One night, I was awakened by a more distinct sound, like footsteps downstairs. My heart raced, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the way as I slowly descended the stairs. Each step seemed to echo deafeningly in the quiet of the house. When I reached downstairs, everything was in absolute silence, with no signs of movement or presence. The environment was still, but the tension in the air was almost tangible. I looked around, trying to find a rational explanation for the noises. Maybe it was just the house settling, I thought, although this didn't dissipate my uneasiness. The sleepless nights began to affect me deeply. The exhaustion and restlessness made each day harder to bear. Besides the strange sensations inside the house, I started to notice bizarre behaviors in my neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, always after nightfall. At various nighttime hours, I saw Mrs. Martinez sitting on her porch, static, apparently watching my house. Her piercing gaze made me uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore it, thinking it could just be a coincidence or a habit of hers. One night, I was awakened by a strange noise coming from downstairs. The sound was subtle, but enough to wake me up. With my heart racing, I slowly descended the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. As I approached the door, I noticed a shadow outside, as if someone was there. I decided to look through the peephole to see what it was. What I saw made my blood run cold. Mrs. Martinez was standing right in front of my door, staring directly at it. She was wearing only a thin pajama, despite the cold night, and had a vacant and somber expression which seemed to pierce directly into my soul. It was 3 a.m, and the scene was surreal and terrifying. I was paralyzed for a moment, my mind racing with thoughts of panic and confusion. Seeing Mrs. Martinez at that hour, so close and watching my house, was simply horrifying. I silently went back to my room as quickly as I could and hid under the covers, trying to calm my breathing and hoping the feeling of dread would pass. Each minute felt like an eternity. The darkness of the room felt even more tense, and the fear that something worse could happen kept me awake for the rest of the night. I tried to rationalize the situation, but the image of Mrs. Martinez standing at my door with that empty look continued to haunt me. I went back to my house, still disturbed by the conversation with Mrs. Martinez. The exhaustion from the sleepless night overcame me, and I ended up lying in my room, passing out deeply until 7 p.m. When I woke up, I looked at the clock that I had received from my neighbour, sitting on the nightstand next to the bed. The soft evening light reflected on the enigmatic inscriptions, and something made me realise that everything had started to happen after receiving Mrs. Martinez's gift. I got up slowly, still feeling the exhaustion in my body, and went on with some chores around the house. Night fell, and around 11 p.m. I noticed that Mrs. Martinez wasn't outside at any moment. Things seemed to be more normalised, which brought a bit of relief. The next morning, I decided to take the clock to an antique shop to see if the owner could know something about it. Upon entering the shop, the owner, an elderly man with thin-rimmed glasses, examined the clock attentively. "I've never seen this model before," he said, turning the clock in his hands. "Nor this brand. And these inscriptions, I can't identify what it says." He took a picture of the clock and got my contact information, promising to get in touch if he discovered anything. I thanked him and returned home, a bit frustrated, but hoping he could uncover some mystery. That night, everything intensified. I woke up abruptly with the feeling that someone was in my room. When I opened my eyes, my heart almost stopped. Mrs. Martinez was sitting in a chair next to my bed. Fear paralyzed me. I tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond, only maintained that empty and disturbing look. When I gathered the courage to approach her, she simply vanished. Feeling my heart race, I ran to the window. To my horror, I saw Mrs. Martinez outside again, looking directly at the window where I was. The scene almost made me lose my mind. I looked at the clock and saw that it was 3 a.m. Terrified, I went back under the covers, listening to light footsteps inside the house, but too scared to do anything. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I fell asleep. After days living under constant stress and paranoia, I decided once again to visit Mrs. Martinez to clarify once and for all what was happening. I walked to her house in the morning, but upon knocking on the door, there was no response. I waited for a few minutes, trying to hear any sound coming from inside, but everything was in absolute silence. The discomfort only grew. Mrs. Martinez's absence only increased my unease. I spent the day trying to keep my mind occupied with simple tasks, but anxiety was a constant shadow, following me around every corner. As the day turned into night, my determination to confront the neighbour grew. I needed to resolve this, understand what was happening. Around midnight, I saw her outside again, fixing her gaze on my house. This time, I resolved to speak with her, no matter what happened. The faint moonlight illuminated the yard, casting sinister shadows on the walls. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the door. With my heart racing, I stepped into the yard. The night was cold. The icy air seemed to cut my skin, but the adrenaline kept me warm. Each step echoed in the silence, increasing my tension. I saw Mrs. Martinez in her yard, but she had her back to me, motionless, like a statue. I called out to her, "Mrs. Martinez!" my voice trembling and weak in the cold air. There was no response. I decided to get closer, each step heavier than the last. The damp grass under my feet made a muffled sound, and my heart felt like it was about to explode with fear. When I finally got close, I hesitantly touched her shoulder. "Mrs. Martinez, we need to talk," I said, my voice almost inaudible. She turned slowly, and what I saw was bizarre and terrifying. Mrs. Martinez had no face, eyes, mouth, nose. All were gone, leaving only a smooth mass of skin where features should have been. The shock was immense, and a muffled scream escaped my lips. Before I could react, Mrs. Martinez made a quick, abrupt movement, touching my face with her cold, wrinkled hands. The sensation was strangely paralyzing, as if an internal ice was freezing me from the inside, and a deep fear took hold of me. I felt a wave of panic and despair. Without thinking twice, I broke free and ran back, my feet almost tripping as I climbed the porch steps. My heart was pounding uncontrollably in my chest, each beat resounding like a drum. I entered and locked all the doors and windows, my hands trembling so much I could barely turn the keys. Panic took over me, and tears streamed down my face, hot against the cold skin. Inside the house, I began to pace back and forth, my heart still racing and my mind spinning in a whirlwind of thoughts. What do I do? What is happening? I asked myself, trying to find a solution amidst the desperation. The image of Mrs. Martinez's faceless visage wouldn't leave my mind, a vision seemingly etched into my memories. Desperate and not knowing what to do, I realized I needed to get out of there. Panic took over as I hastily searched for my keys in my jacket pocket. I stumbled out of the house, heart pounding, and upon opening the door, I was greeted by the terrifying sight of Mrs. Martinez standing in the middle of the yard. Her face was a smooth mass of skin, devoid of eyes, mouth, or nose. A scream of terror stuck in my throat, but I managed to look away and run to the car. My trembling hands made it difficult to start the engine. I grabbed my phone from the dashboard and dialed my mum's number, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. "Mum, it's me," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Something horrible is happening. Mrs. Martinez. She has no face. I'm so scared." On the other end of the line, my mum tried to calm me down. "Anna, take a deep breath. Are you driving? Come here right now. We'll figure this out together. Stay calm and drive carefully." As I drove through the deserted streets, I felt a mix of panic and relief at leaving that house behind. I explained more details to my mum, trying not to lose focus on the road. The journey seemed endless, and every shadow on the road made my heart leap. When I finally arrived at my parents' house, I parked the car hastily and ran to the door. My mum quickly opened it, greeting me with a tight hug. "You're safe now," she whispered, stroking my hair as I sobbed. Inside the house, sitting on the living room couch, I detailed what had happened. "Mum, I saw her face disappear. She was outside, then in my room, and then she touched me. It was horrible. I don't know what to do," I said, trying to control my tears. My mum looked at me with deep concern, but tried to stay calm. "Anna, you're exhausted. It might be that the stress and lack of sleep are affecting your mind. We'll take care of you, but first, you need to rest." I nodded, trying to calm myself. "Maybe you're right. I just need to sleep a little." She led me to the guest room, helping me lie down. "Try to rest, dear. Tomorrow we'll think about what to do." Lying in bed, I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion and fear dragging me into unconsciousness. My parents' house had always been a safe haven, and for the first time in many days, I felt a small flicker of peace. Surprisingly, I managed to sleep deeply without disturbing nightmares. I was pulled from a deep, comforting sleep by the ringing of my phone. Still groggy, I looked at the display and saw Mr. Thompson's name, the antique shop owner. My heart began to race. I answered quickly, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse with sleep and anxiety. "Anna, it's Mr. Thompson. Sorry to bother you so early, but I had to call. Do you still have the clock?" "Yes, I do," I replied, trying to control my rapid breathing. "I did some research on the inscriptions on the clock," he continued, his voice heavy with gravity. "They mean time takes your soul. And there's more. The history of this clock is dark. It's said that whoever wears it passes a year of life to the person who gave it to them each day. When enough time has passed, the person simply dies suddenly, and the legend says they are found with their face disfigured. My blood ran cold. The connection seemed impossible, but at the same time terrifyingly real. I remembered Mrs. Martinez, her faceless visage, and the cold touch of her hands. A deep fear began to take hold of me again, stronger than ever. "Mr. Thompson," my voice trembled. "What should I do?" "You need to get rid of that clock, Anna. Throw it away. Destroy it if you can. Don't let it keep draining your life." I hung up the phone, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. I looked at the clock on my wrist, that gift that initially seemed harmless, but now revealed itself to be a terrible curse. My trembling hands touched the cold surface of the clock, and a sense of dread enveloped me. Slowly, I took the clock to the nightstand and hesitantly looked at the reflection in the glass. What I saw petrified me. My own face was reflected in a distorted and unrecognizable way. My features were blurred, as if the essence of who I was disappearing. The horror of this vision made me recoil. The truth about the clock finally revealed itself relentlessly. That gift was sucking my soul.